Hi, my name is Caitlin Schulenberg. For my Capstone presentation, I decided to focus on the theme, teaching diverse learners. My competency statement says that I am competent in making intentional teaching decisions aimed at meeting the needs of struggling readers to promote their student success. When I say intentional teaching decisions, I just mean incorporating appropriate instructional strategies as well as adapting my instruction to meet all learners' needs. The questions that I use to guide my presentation are: which students might be missing and why? What knowledge, skills, and strategies should a teacher use to teach learners of all ability levels? And then, how can I make the necessary accommodations for the learners in my classroom? So I really used all three of those questions to explain my growth from the very beginning of my time at UNL to my student teaching, as well as how I will continue to grow in this competency. So moving into my first piece of evidence, I wanted to go as far back into the program as I possibly could in order to really show how I've grown in teaching diverse learners. So this was from my first practicum, and I was in a 4th grade classroom at Sheridan Elementary School. I was teaching a writing lesson on note-taking strategies in a unit about biographies for students. I taught the students the ABC Lou mnemonic, which was to help them know what different methods that they could use for note-taking. And some of those were abbreviations, bullet points, caveman language, lists, using one word for many, as well as using their own words. The part of the lesson I really wanted to focus on was in the lesson body. And this was when I had students work in groups in order to read a part of a biography and then take notes on it using only one of the strategies in the ABC Lou mnemonic. And what I noticed was the students, they weren't reading because either they were letting group members do that or they were just not focused, and then they weren't really able to complete the objective of taking the notes. I also saw this evident in my closure because I wanted students to be able to listen to the different groups' notes that they took and make them into complete sentences, which they would have to do later on in their writing. But they weren't able to do this if they didn't have an understanding of that text first, because they couldn't paraphrase it and change it and make it into their own type of sentence. In my post-lesson reflection, I said, after talking to my cooperating teacher, we both realized it can be challenging to create lessons that meet all students' needs, from the gifted students to the ones who receive special education services. I had multiple gifted students in my classroom, so they were the ones really reading and answering my questions. So at first, I kind of had an elevated feeling of how the lesson went. But later on, I figured out that I was missing a group of students, and those were the students who struggled to read or weren't confident in their reading abilities. From this, I really learned that I can't just teach one strategy or one whole lesson to students, but I need to make the necessary accommodations. So moving into my second piece of evidence, which was from when I was tutoring a 4th grade student at the Schmoker Reader Center. At the beginning of the semester, he began reading at a DRA 28, which is a middle of 2nd grade reading level. So I knew I had to really provide him with the appropriate strategies so he would be able to be successful and feel successful. So some of these I used were choral reading, which was to match our fluencies while reading together, as well as echo reading, which is a strategy where I would model the pace and expression and rate he would need to read at, and then he would mimic that, because he really needed that focus on fluency first for reading. Later on, I found that my student wasn't confident in his reading ability and really needed to be engaged and motivated to come to tutoring. So I really turned to The Highly Engaged Classroom by Robert Marzino and Deborah Pinkering. A quote that stuck out to me in this was, Skinner associated the following emotions with engagement: enthusiasm, interest, enjoyment, satisfaction, pride, vitality, and zest. What I focused on for my student was really that interest piece, because I had already done an interest inventory and I knew that my student liked to move around and be active. So that was what I did with my flexible lesson time. I implemented some readers theater, and specifically my student, we were doing a readers theater, and he was a hula hoop champion and I was a reporter interviewing him. So first we practiced just kind of with that echo reads of mimicking the expression we needed for that acting piece. And then we really got to incorporate the movement piece, and I actually brought hula hoops and we were able to have more fun with that. And at the end of the lesson, my student came out of it saying, "Can we do this again?" When normally he was really frustrated with his reading and not reaching his goals. So at the end of the semester, he went from that DRA 28 to a DRA 38, which was a tremendous growth over just one semester, and he gained a lot more confidence. He even went away saying a phrase we always said, which is, "If you can think it, I can do it." So I just saw that confidence really grow, and so I knew I could provide those special accommodations for one student, and now I wanted to be able to do it for a whole classroom. So that moves me into my student teaching. I was in a 3rd grade classroom at Belmont Elementary School, and I had a large population of diverse learners. Out of the 22 students in my classroom, at the beginning of the year, only 6 were on or above their grade level in reading. So a lot of them had reading goals for their IEPs, were in RTI support for their reading. So I knew I could provide those specific accommodations for the students in my classroom. So we were teaching a math unit on multiplication and division, and we really noticed that the students were struggling on the word problems, the language piece of it. They even were just multiplying the 2 numbers together, and then when we moved into division, that became a problem because you can't just multiply 35 and 5 together. It becomes a problem because they didn't even know how to do that. So talking to my team and knowing my individualized students, we decided to implement the understand, plan, solve, and look back strategy. And in that strategy, it just helped the students break down the problem and really have a good understanding of what was going on. We encourage students to read the problem and even reread, and then underline the important information, and also draw a picture if that would most benefit them, especially for those students who needed a more concrete representation of what was going on in the problem. And then they would be able to solve and out the problem and look back by rereading and making sure that was what they needed to do in the problem and it answered the question. Specifically in a lesson on doing a multiplication and division word problems, I had the students partnered in cooperative learning groups, and they had already been partnered with appropriate table partners using that Kagan structure. And so this allowed students to kind of break down the information, not answer all of the questions, and have collaborative conversations with peers. But I did notice that some of those collaborative conversations were a struggle for some students. So we decided to implement sentence stems into their learning. And this kind of mirrored what we were talking about with the understand, plan, solve, and look back strategy. And so then they were able really to have more meaningful conversations with their table partners and have a really solid understanding of the word problems. So overall in my student teaching experience, they've made tremendous growth, and we have even taken out the sentence stems for some students in order to challenge them a little bit more in their learning. But I have noticed that sentence stems were effective also in other areas, such as guided reading with my approaching guided reading group. And so no matter if it's math guided reading or even social studies, sentence stems is a proper accommodation to help them explain their thinking and do that without being kind of held back by not having that prior knowledge. So overall, what I've learned is that every student has specific strengths and challenges, and it is my job as their teacher to plan instruction with the needs of them in mind. So really understanding my students and building relationships with them in order to know exactly what they'll need in the classroom. And I really know that this I'm able to do this in a one-on-one setting as well as a whole group setting, and just taking their interests and needs to heart. I also know now that teachers need to incorporate the strategies and methods to help students engage in content and be motivated to learn. So I will continue to utilize the research-based strategies that I've learned at my time at UNL, as well as continue to learn more strategies. I know that education is constantly evolving and changing, and I want to be able to teach the future generations of students. Moving into my reflection of growth, I truly believe now I know what it means to teach diverse learners. I know that all students are unique and are going to need different accommodations and scaffolds in order to be successful in the classroom. I also realize that this is an ongoing process of my own learning and then planning for instruction, the students then learning, and then evaluating how the lesson went and how students, what they were successful with and what they still need help with, and then kind of adapting my instruction to still meet their needs. I've also learned that I'm a reflective teacher, and I've shown this from the beginning of my program all the way into my student teaching to know that I'm able to continually meet students' needs. So as I go on, one of my goals for all students in my classroom is that they are lifelong learners and they're passionate about their own learning. And I know this comes from really showing them this in myself as well and knowing that I'm continually learning. One of the main things I want to work on is learning new linguistically and culturally responsive strategies for English language learners in my classroom. I had a lot of these at Belmont, and so I went to multiple professional developments on how to help those students in guided reading. So pre-teaching vocabulary, or really making sure they had a solid understanding of the background knowledge they would need before reading the book. So these were extremely helpful, and I know that this is an area I still want to focus on, so I'm probably taking graduate courses in this area or just continue to have a district that offers these professional developments. So overall, I know that I'm going to have to continue learning new strategies and ways to implement different ideas into the classroom. So I want to continue to talk to master teachers on what can be the most effective and has been proven to not only work for research but also just in the classroom. So I now know that I am competent at teaching diverse learners, and if I continue to be reflective on my practice, that I will continue to grow in this competency.